Oops. All right, welcome everybody. I think we're all here. Again, I'm Elisa Shore. I work at the district office with schools, supervising schools. So I supervise mainly the high schools. And I'm here with a couple people from our team. I'll let them say hi too.
Hi everyone, I'm Carl Logan. I'm one of the area senior directors and I'll be your note taker. And I just put in the chat a link to the Jamboard that I'll be taking notes on for us. I'll also be our timekeeper on the 20 minutes for each question.
And so as we start today, first of all, I would just want to echo the thanks to everyone. This has been a lot of Thursdays that we've spent some quality time together. So I just, again, really appreciate people being here, showing up every week, leaning in every week, having some uncomfortable conversations, but really, really value your time today. So in case we're not back in this group later, I wanted to make sure that we got a chance to say that. We're going to start with that Jamboard that Carl mentioned, just to get some initial ideas and thoughts on there. So I'm going to show it real quick. For those of you that don't spend a lot of quality time in digital school, Jamboards are our fancy version of the chart pack and the stickies that we would be putting around a gym if we were doing this in person. So the way they work, so there's the question right now that we're focusing on. So what do you support from this recommendation? And to add something, you just grab a sticky note and you would put, I like the X, Y, Z. And then you just hit save, and then your sticky note saves. And then this will allow us to move similar ideas together and just get some ideas out there, so that I know many times when we start talking, we go one way and people may have comments they want to get out in that space. So this is sort of a additional way to make sure voices are being heard. So I figure we'll just spend a few minutes of think time looking at that question of what do you support. If you feel like you get your thoughts out there, up here at the top is this little arrow that goes to the next question. So if you want to start thinking about things to change, you would go to that next arrow. So we're just going to spend a few minutes and think time as we get settled in here. All right. So I'm definitely seeing a few themes. Does anybody want to speak to some of their thoughts and just to have an open dialogue on this question? And like I mentioned, people can go ahead and add other ideas or thoughts that come up as we go. And the inner teacher in me can start calling on folks if that's helpful.
Apologies, I was reading all the notes from everybody. I really like I've been looking and talking to folks this whole entire week, and it seems that option C is the one that makes the most sense, because it specifically addresses the overcrowding issues from Bridger that are absolutely immediate. I think in an administrator position, I think it would also help to have all the Spanish DLI program there for scheduling as well. And I really like the idea of Aurora, Marysville, and going to Kellogg, as those are all communities that have a high SES, and could benefit from having, and are close together to Kellogg, that could benefit from being in that location.
Thank you, Martha.
Can I just say ditto? I mean that seriously. I mean, Martha just said everything that I would say. I'll just reiterate, Bridger finally being addressed, meaning overcrowding, neighborhoods that are connected to each other, going to, one middle school, it's great. Really putting, like she mentioned already, I mean, you took it all out of my mouth, Martha. It's really good. I feel like we're doing what was the initial ask of what we were supposed to do, which is addressing the issues with, socioeconomic and racial concerns, race concerns as far as equal opportunity. So, I mean, let's make sure that we continue to keep that lens. And I think option C really does address that overall. Yes. Is it perfect? No, not at all. But I think it addresses most of the options.
Thank you, Michael. Marissa, Beth, Lily, other parent perspectives?
I was just about to type in the chat that I think we might need to spend more time on what we don't like.
Anything from school administrators that we haven't heard from? And Duncan, welcome. Are you our student?
Yes, I am. I am the student rep from Franklin High School, so right at the heart of this.
Fantastic. Welcome.
Thank you.
Lisa, I do want to just address, I'm noticing a lot of support for the fact that there is a unified Spanish DLI at Kellogg, and from a perspective of another issue, and this is more like teacher related, but I think it really alleviates the stressor of trying to schedule 3 separate groups at Mount Tabor. So many wins on that front. I just want to point that one out.
Lily, did we get that on here? That scheduling piece?
Can you say that again? By having the Spanish DLI at Kellogg, it relieves.
Well, Tanya is not here. I know it's not in our group tonight, but what I know as a teacher is that trying to schedule 3 strands at one school is a total challenge. So you've got neighborhood and Spanish and Japanese at Mount Tabor, and pulling that Spanish to unify it, which is a win for all of the Spanish programs to be together and stronger, I believe, at Kellogg. I think it is also helpful, and I think that a lot of parents, I am a parent, but I'm also a teacher. I've been in the district over 20 years, and I just believe that it is a real just technical challenge and teaching challenge to try and get the scheduling to go on for that many scenarios. So I am glad about that.
Lily, do you have any comment on, I know, you know, Beth Kavanaugh has been working on all these different scenarios and really focusing on the enrollment numbers and like sending them out to the coalition. So she has had this idea about the Japanese immersion program going to Harrison Park Middle School as well as Chinese immersion, and felt like, well, do we know whether having balanced programs at the same middle school is as much of a problem as having like a single strand program at a middle school? I mean,
I'm not a principal. I'm a teacher, but I have been involved in scheduling before and trying to schedule. And I'm actually an electives teacher. So trying to schedule kids in 3 strands at one middle school is super challenging. And then also the fact that as opposed to like, if you had 2 strands together or making it different, you would allow that to be like more teachers and more options and more, you know, flexibility for students. So for example, like if a kid is in a lower grade, but has a higher proficiency and could move forward, you know what I'm saying? Like when you have,
so I mean, if there are 2 strands of one language versus one, does that make things easier? Because then you don't have that, you know,
not in a dual language scenario, because in a middle school situation, you're talking about 2 elective classes at minimum. And where, you know, in a middle school situation, you have limited electives. And I mean, you know, to get on a way different tangent, I think middle school should be all electives, but that's a totally different scenario. I think that if we were to, and I don't know, it's Richard's in this. I mean, speak from like a principal and a scheduling perspective, you're talking about like trying to channel kids. And when you're trying to channel kids and you're channeling them in 3 separate directions, it just becomes unruly. And it also means, and I will speak as an art teacher, it means that kids are limited in their options to be able to take other electives, such as arts classes, music, and, you know, instrumental music, and other things especially.
So Marissa, I can speak to this if that's okay, Lily. So I think what has happened at Mount Tabor specifically, because they have 2 strands or 2 DLI programs in a neighborhood program, is that there's legitimately not enough room for enough electives to be held there. So then you have students that are in Chinese immersion taking Spanish class as their elective rather than an art class. That they would like to, or having to take these other electives that are necessary to keep the DLI strands going and the neighborhood strands going, knowing that there's not enough space literally in the daily schedule for them to be able to access what you would qualify as the fun electives or the more artistic electives. So having just one strand of DLI in a school over two specific DLI programs allows the flexibility for the students in those programs to be able to access all of the other artistic or free-flowing electives that are available.
But Martha, I would love to clarify it. Like, though I do consider, you know, visual art like a core and a academic subject, but like, I think, you know, sometimes we have like Spanish and, you know, Japanese or whatever as like math or social studies, or like, you know, those are considered core versus like, you know, art is considered like true elective, like not core. So I just want to clarify, like, if you're putting a core class as an elective, I mean, it's like, it's a little, I don't know.
I think, yeah, I think there's a couple things that play into the schedule too. Are we talking a 6-period middle school schedule and a 7-period? Are we talking 1 strand, so meaning just 30 kids per grade in the Japanese program, or are we talking 2 or 3? Because then you get more flexibility. it's a complicated question. And probably it makes sense for us to.
Hear you. Mhm.
Uh-oh, is that just me? Did it
No, we
come-
can't hear her.
Okay.
Your mute is on, Lisa.
I know the bar disappears
Oh, yeah.
and then I can't get it back. It won't come back always. So I apologize. Anyway, I don't know what I said and what I didn't say there, but the schedule conversation is multifaceted. So is there anything more in the support? And we can go ahead and move to what do we want to change?
I think the only other thing that I would support is that it hopefully opens up, putting it at a lower level of attendance by 75%. It makes it so there's the option of possibly Harrison Park students being able to attend Kellogg. I think that's something that I personally would like to see occur. Is they also follow that outer southeast location, but I think keeping that option open is something that we can discuss in phase 2. But it keeps the options open to be able to discuss what the possibilities are, right?
All right, so it looks like we have a few ideas already on things to change. So one being a concrete plan for Creston. And how do we get Creston to be a K-5? Conversation looks like about the split feeder for Atkinson. And then something about the attendance being higher at Kellogg, and then how that impacts with space. I don't remember us being this quiet last time.
I'm sorry, are we supposed to be in a different flip board or Jamboard?
Yeah, we just moved to the second panel.
Okay, mine didn't move. I have to move it myself. Gotcha. Thank you.
May I just make a suggestion? Some of these are comments and not something that you want changed. So that having specificity on, you're saying something that I wish there was a concrete plan for Creston. So that's not an actionable statement. But if you had a statement that is, I wish the plan for Creston was, and then something specific, that would be, otherwise the comment is noted, but there isn't an actionable item for us to do tonight. And it's okay to have the comment, but I'm trying to draw out if there's an action you want us to do as we're making decisions tonight.
I was one person that typed that, and I guess I don't know what the solution is, but I wish there was a solution. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I just want it to be noted.
I think it's a great comment. I just want to say that when we're going to go and compile these, we're going to try to take actions to summarize, and that would be one that I couldn't make an action out of it. So I will certainly listen to the comment, but it's not a suggested change to the proposal.
So I know one thing that I heard with the speakers earlier was around for Bridger neighborhood 6-8 of, potentially advocating that students would have a choice of Harrison Park or Kellogg. So are there, not necessarily that specific choice, but is there something we could think of that would make sense for Creston 6-8 for the year while we figure out what the plan is long-term for Creston?
I also don't think they should have to change twice, which is, I know that not everyone's wishes can happen, but it just seems unfair to have them go somewhere temporarily. And I know Bridger's in that same boat too, but that just seems an extra hardship for already really tough years for kiddos.
And maybe someone can help us understand as parents, like, how would you even make that decision? Like, who decides? You know, it's like we're saying let the kids decide, but what if they all chose to go to Kellogg, and then who's going to say, no, these 50 kids can't go to Kellogg? Because I think we're getting back into that whole, you know, I'm not saying it happens all the time, but I'm saying we're getting into those, people are shaking hands on the side, doing things behind doors that they shouldn't be doing to allow for that to happen. We all realists here, that happens. And so I really would like to understand, before I'd even talk about that, is how would that even work? How would it be truly equitable when we're trying to facilitate that for the kids? Because I think they're big. I think their fifth graders are. Let me just say this. Sorry, Lily. I think fifth graders are able to make that decision. I truly think that as a fifth grade kid, you can really make that decision for yourself based off of what's available at HP or at that time, and what's available at Kellogg at that time. So I think, you know, again, how really play, would parents be involved, all the different stuff. Sorry, Lily, go ahead.
No, I really appreciate what you're saying. And I want to acknowledge the one thing that you said that I think that is not mentioned enough, is that the people that are in the know allow things to happen and get their way, and the people who don't. And often those people are white and upper class, upper educated, or whatever. I work at Lincoln High School. It happens all the time. People who are pushy and are lawyers make things happen. People who are poor and perhaps people of a different language or color or whatever don't have those same opportunities or even power to make those choices. And I think that it's time to be called out. And I think you're calling that out. And I appreciate that a lot. But on the other hand, I really think it's important. I was very moved by some of the comments about the kids from Bridger who've had a lot of change going on. And I think that it would be really helpful for flexibility and understanding and real like listening, and for compassion to play a role here. I mean, I was completely moved by Min's statement and the compassion and the intensity that's going on. The only problem is that like specifically revolves around a language. And I think that what we're talking about right now is neighborhood. And I want to really be clear that we're not talking about program changes and flexibility. We're talking about the ability for neighborhood, like, you know, regular education kids to like have the ability to like, hey, you know, my entire class went to this school and I live like 1 block away, or I don't know. I hear a lot of that impassion from parent friends. I have a 6th grader, and I just hear a lot of that, like, I really hope my kid can be with their friend group.
Is there a thing, within that, is Kellogg going to be allowed to have hardship transfer? I know that somebody mentioned a few weeks ago that we saw the same thing occur with Fabian, in which attendance increased due to hardship transfer. I'm wondering if that's going to be the possibility or case for those students that are close to proximity within a specific radius of Kellogg, and they'll be able to transfer based on that.
Can I ask a question to Creston parents or people advocating for Creston? How many people graduate from 5th grade into middle school, and would moving them to Cleveland help with Franklin over enrollment?
So I don't have the exact numbers from 5th to 6th. And just to clarify, you're asking that Creston moved to, like, Creston takes the path of Hosford, Cleveland instead of Kellogg, Franklin?
Yeah,
That what you're-
because my main thing is Franklin overcrowding being there right now. So
Yeah. From what I've seen with the past numbers, there's not enough room right now for Creston to go to Hosford. And if Creston then adds to Hosford, then it will only maintain or increase the overcrowding at Cleveland. So unfortunately, the Franklin Cleveland thing is not helping to balance, because the other high schools are the ones that we need to add to in order to lower the overcrowding, is my understanding, because Creston or Cleveland and Franklin are so close to being overcrowded, or are at this point.
okay.
That
thank you.
answer your question, Duncan?
Yeah, thank you.
There is more room at Cleveland's as opposed to Franklin. Cleveland hovers just under 1,600 kids right now.
That includes the modulars though, right?
It does include the modulars. So
Yeah.
Cleveland is a little ways away from the rebuild. So that is part of the conversation. And back to Martha's question about the hardship transfers. Nothing in board policy right now would change that. We would have to change some policy to not allow those for Kellogg. So they would exist just like they would for any school or situation.
Which is perfect, I guess. I guess my thing would be like, can we make that very clearly known to families that that's the case, right? And can it be translated in a timely manner for all the families to be able to know that that's the case, right? So continue hardship transfer to Kellogg to those that are within a radius by, because the reality is that Kellogg will see some increase in population. This always happens when there's a new building that opens up. And that's due to that hardship transfer. But what we have seen is that those who are able to apply for hardship transfer are those that actually know that it exists, while some other families don't know, right?
Rosie, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just had back to the Creston thing and Claire's comment about trying to like make a proactive statement versus just saying, you know, what we don't want to happen. I guess what I'm hearing is there's no room at Hosford because it's crowded. There's no room at Kellogg because it's overcrowded. Franklin's overcrowded. Cleveland's overcrowded. I guess if I'm a Creston person, which I'm not, I don't have kids there, I live near it, but I guess that to me just, I feel like Creston's hearing there's no room for you anywhere. And I'm just wondering what ideas do people have as to where we could feed Creston if Hosford's crowded and Kellogg's crowded? Like what other ideas are out there, I'm wondering. I'm looking at the map right now and I mean, Lane's kind of there, but it seems pretty far south. I'm just curious if anyone has any ideas for what we might do with those kiddos.
Well, I can weigh in just a little bit. That's why I wrote the one about understanding how the building is going to be used at Kellogg, because we've been sort of using a number of 80% as a full building because it typically is, it feels full, but I don't, and that's but that's because what we basically do, I think, is just take the square footage of the building and determine how many kids can fit there. And so how the building is used, what the classrooms look like, how big they are, what's a classroom, what's a common space, some of those pieces figure into what 80% looks like in a building or what 85% looks like. And I really don't understand, you know, I haven't seen a plan or haven't looked at a plan of Kellogg. So it may not be that 80% is crowded in the same way that 80% is super crowded at the building that I'm in right now, which is Arleta. I just don't know. So if in fact 85% of Kellogg is not anywhere near as crowded as a full, I mean, just an overloaded school, then I would say we've got room at Kellogg for Creston.
Dana,
Thank you, John. I appreciate that.
can you help at all with that 80%, what that means?
Yeah, well, it's complicated. It takes into account all the different types of classrooms that we have. You know, if we have, for example, a particular type of SPED classroom, you know, obviously the ages of the kids, how many kids are in each one, what kind of breakout rooms there might be. So it's a pretty detailed analysis. So I don't know if 5%, if you can just say, okay, well, yeah, 5% more kids, you know, 5% of 600 or whatever the number is, and we can accommodate that. We'd really need to look at what classes, what kinds of classes are those? You know, does that make sense?
So I just looked up just so we have some numbers of what we're talking about. So Creston's middle school, just straight numbers, if they, for next year, if all the kids went together, is 134 students. And just so you guys know, Bridgers is for our middle school for next year, it's 60 students.
So yeah, I think it would depend on what that mix of 130 looked like, if that's just all general classrooms, if just gen ed classrooms. Possible. I'm not sure what the total, what that brings to the school for a total.
And that's not taking into account classroom with SPED students, right?
Right.
Well, students, speech, or any other special programming, correct?
When we come up with the percentage, we do look at how many classrooms there are, and we break them out by if there's, we have any SPED classrooms, we have an art classroom, a science classroom, things like that, because they get used differently. So it's not just 80% of the square footage. It's a little bit more detailed than that. So I think it would depend on the, like the 130 kids, are all 130 of those just general education classrooms? You know, are those, they got 30 kids in them? Then we could look and see if we could accommodate that.
Go for it, Beth.
Can someone in admin remind me how many students per middle school class is allowed? What is the number of students that are in a class? Sorry to interrupt, Beth. I didn't see your hand up. My apology.
We don't actually have limits. We have thresholds that we pay extra to teachers, but there isn't a specific limit.
And I think we try to staff, Carl, you may know this better, like it's 1 to 30, 1 to 27 for middle school.
Yeah, it could be up like mid 30s, 33, 35.
I think in some
every year
total number of students. So,
Right.
so I think sometimes it's across all classes.
All right, Beth, go for it.
So I'm just wondering, during the planning stages of Kellogg, there was a program that was created. And then the building was designed off of that. And they determined how many 6th grade classes, how many specialty classes. There was a plan that was put into place. There has to be in order for the building to be built. What was that based on? Like there had to have been assumptions and numbers looking at what the need is. And I'm just wondering why that wasn't the beginning of our process. Like before we jumped into who should go, it's like, well, how many can it support?
I actually wasn't here when that was created. My guess, though, is that I believe it's around 600 or 630 is what the number of kids is. How that's broken up into specific classrooms, I don't know. That typically gets done as you get closer in on the design. And I know they brought in, I think, a substitute kind of principal for a while to help with some of those decisions. So I know the total number of kids, I believe, is around 630, but exactly how that's divided up and what kinds of classrooms, I don't know the answer to that.
I think we just need to do the math because it says here on our list that Kellogg's enrollment currently has, our plan is 608, and that's 75.7%. So we just need to, and I think it was in one of our first documents gave the total enrollment which I think it's closer to 700.
That's a,
There you go.
so
803.
PBS in
That's
like 5 years ago did like a massive like sort of comprehensive like what is the best programming for students. And so I mean if there was a lot of like analytics based on what was suggested as best practice as well as different neighborhoods, but I would really, without any data in front of me, guess that this particular neighborhood has radically changed in the last 5 years in terms of a lot of gentrification. So I mean, I'm going to guess that it's hard to keep up on some levels.
So one of the stickies on here, which I think it looks at the Creston issue with a different lens, right, has around provide Creston with extra middle school electives to match what's available at Kellogg. So knowing that maybe we need more time, maybe then we make sure that if all Kellogg kids are going to get two fine art options for elective classes and two this options and two this options, how could we make something, take what Creston is doing for the next year while we figure it out and enhance it? And I'm not necessarily advocating for this. It kind of shifts what we were just talking about a little bit. So it doesn't feel maybe like they were left out.
And then we would do that for Harrison Park as well.
I think one of the challenges that, yes, I think additional resources and support would definitely help and would make the community feel like the middle schoolers are being centered. I think the challenge is the building facility itself, and that we don't have the ability to move kids into different classes because we are so limited in our size. It was designed as a K-5 and we've moved it to a K-8. And a lot of our middle schoolers aren't even allowed to move between classes. And when they do, they're actually moved, like the transition is actually outside. So when they change classes, they have to go outside in the rain with all their stuff because they don't want to disturb the elementary kids, and they're right across the hall from the kindergartners. So I mean, I think the additional resources that we have to figure out how that would then function in the school building facility that we have. And I don't have the answer to that. I hate saying that, posing the problem and not actually helping with the solution. I just don't know how to make it work with what we have.
Regina, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was going to say those concerns are also shared by other K-8s in other parts of PPS as well. Currently being an administrator in one of those K-8s. I wanted to circle back to, I think, one of Rosie's questions around like kind of like in terms of like Creston and then like, oh, there's space at Lane. And I think that might also address why maybe Kellogg is the size that it's at, because we have other middle schools that are not at capacity. And then of course, there's just like the geographic component of like, okay, like Creston is geographically closer to Hosford. And then just noting that there is a domino effect, right? Like, so yes, potentially because Creston is closer to Hosford, they could feed there. But that could also mean, in later phases that other schools or other boundaries with that, of schools that feed to Hosford might also change so that their enrollment is then also lower. Because there's that, there's just an effect as we move geographically north in looking at boundary and enrollment changes.
I just wanted to add a piece. I looked up, it says that Kellogg's 100% is 803 kids.
Right, so that would assume that every classroom is used fully at all periods, which is.
I'm just saying that that's the number we have. It's just like, I mean, Arleta, if it says what our percentage is at 100%, we couldn't possibly do it.
Right.
We're full at 80. I just don't know how Kellogg is utilized in that sense. But 803 is what the graph says that we were given first night.
Well, then now you can see how Bridger has felt, because we have been over 100% multiple years.
Somebody needs to do some better analytics at PPS. That's all I got to say. But anyways, from a parent point of view, when I hear, 80% is actually 100%, that just doesn't make any sense to me from a numbers perspective. Just making a comment. Sorry, kind of half joking, half serious.
I do want to address that, Michael. So I think that it's tough in terms of like the way we have kids who live in a neighborhood. If you have an address and you're in that neighborhood, no matter when you say I am coming to school, you get to go to school there. I mean, so if you have that system, you will have a huge fluctuation that you can't control. So
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you, Lily. Thank you.
I think that also speaks to what Melissa shared in terms of the numbers. Like we have the numbers of students who are currently enrolled at Creston and currently enrolled at Bridger. But when we make like recommendations and ultimately changes, right? Like if we were then to say like all of these students in these neighborhoods can now feed to Kellogg, of course we should anticipate that more students who live in those neighborhoods would then choose to go to that middle school that is now open, as opposed to the K-8 option that they had previously. And so that's another reason why I think it can be prudent to be more conservative in Kellogg being enrolled under that 80% utilization rate, as opposed to already knowing that like, hey, it looks like we're going to be over that percentage or whatever percentage we deem makes a school feel full.
All right. Did I see a hand?
Yeah, I just want to ask one question, but I know we're running out of time on this. Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah.
Sure. Martha, I believe you're Atkinson parent with a kid in the DLI program. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
What is the, I guess, what is the feeling from the DLI, Spanish DLI program at Atkinson about that, you all going to Kellogg?
From the DLI parents, what we have seen is that they would prefer that that's the case, because Atkinson is literally right there from Kellogg and you can see it from Atkinson basically. Because in the Spanish speaking parents, a lot of them are undocumented and they have been able to work contracts with landlords to be able to move within that community. So to be able to be in that community when they have no access to full transportation or not flexibility of moving as easily as somebody that's documented would, or the option to move as easily, is a positive to them. For me specifically as a parent, I have the flexibility to move because I have a car. So whatever happens, happens, but that is what we're hearing from the community, specifically the undocumented community. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I didn't know what that was, what parents were feeling. So I appreciate that.
Thank you for asking, Beth. I appreciate that.
And I know as someone who sees appeals, speaking of hardships, the middle school, I've bonded now with a group of kids, I feel like happens more than the elementary ones. I could be wrong. I don't have any numbers to back up my assumption, but so splitting it at a middle school to two different high schools, I feel like has an impact for kids that's different than elementary, where they haven't mixed as much because they're typically just in homerooms. So they may not know as many other kids in other programs. All right, so let's now move.
I'm sorry. I know I've spoken a lot, but also, or Elisa, I would radically differ my opinion, because I think that things shift so much in middle school that having a group or cadre from your elementary school where it is not necessarily that you are friends, but that kids know you and have your back in terms of like, you know, their parents and their little brothers in school with your little brother. And like, there's a lot of connection that has been expressed to me in terms of like parent connection and all of that part. In middle school, I think that that there is less sort of like history. I think that things aren't that don't go back like that. I've found that so my 17-year-old is a junior at Cleveland High School. Like his elementary school friend, people he went to elementary school with are like homies, but they're not like friends. They're like people who have his back if he gets like in a weird situation. But you know, it's like the longevity factor, I think, is more important than the middle school factor. And I just want to point out that perspective.
Appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so now we're looking at phase 2 priorities. And we have, I think, maybe 15-ish minutes left, maybe a little less than that. So Creston, obviously.
I think we're going to get transported back at 7:45.
Okay.
So we're not doing slide number 3? We're skipping slide 3?
No, that was kind of like a way to look at, it was in there as like in case we needed it.
Just to clarify, this is what we would add to phase 2 priorities that have not been stated already in the summary, or just what we agree with and what we would add.
I think I would err on the side of let's get it all on there.
Okay.
So we're not making an assumption that, oh, nobody mentioned this piece, so it's less of a priority than what people talked about.
Okay, thank you.
I mentioned on the Discord chat today that I think that I would advocate for the language being changed in the recommendation document about Harrison Park's elementary program. It says like, well, I feel like the language sort of suggests like, well, there are 2 options. One is to have an elementary school within the neighborhood boundary, and the other one is to distribute the Harrison Park students between other elementary schools, and those options are not equal to the Harrison Park families at all. So I would say that we need to have language that you know, makes it clear that the Harrison Park families need an elementary school within the neighborhood boundaries. And so that would by necessity mean that we also have to have a priority of finding a building for creative science.
Anybody want to speak to any of these that are coming up? Any voices that we haven't heard of from tonight? You can still go ahead, Martha.
I'll be like, I'll be quiet. Okay, sorry. I'll give the floor to others first. That was a great reminder. Thank you. Well, now if no one wants to go, then I'll go, I guess. I think for us, specifically in Spanish DLI at Atkinson, and a Bridget for the K-5, the location of, I know that option C focus on Spanish DLI at Lens. That is not an option that the Spanish DLI community would like, as is feels very, for lack of better word, segregatory. And we would love to see at least 2 locations for Spanish DLI to support the reality that Latinx people are found everywhere, not just in outer Southeast Portland. We live all over the place, kind of like white people do too. So yeah, that'd be great.
So Lent and another, you're saying Lent and another location?
Yeah, I think that would be great. Yeah. Because I know that the Bridger DLI is going to, what we're saying is that Bridger DLI probably will leave Bridger. So what is that location for that other Bridger DLI strand? Where is it gonna be? You know, because, you know, I think that's very important to point out. And the same thing with the Chinese immersion program, right? Is that we might make assumption of the concentration of individuals where individuals live, but the reality is that we all live everywhere. White people live in outer Southeast Portland too. Black people do too. Latinx people do too. And queer folks too. So adding that to the mix, because it's necessary to address the reality of that and not use color evasive educational policy language to make arguments, right, that affect communities.
Although in that regard, though, I think it's really important. I feel frustrated sometimes that the impression is that like a bunch of white people are making all these decisions. I mean, I am white. I don't feel like I'm making any decisions. I'm trying to give my input, and I maybe that's a board consideration, but I guess I don't understand, like in the Southeast coalition of people, I don't know, maybe I'm bringing up like a can of worms. I don't understand, like, this is an impossible situation. I have experienced like so many people being so angry about so many different situations. It's like so hard in so many directions. And I don't feel like I'm able to make any decisions. I'm just trying to give input. I hope I'm not screwing up, but that's.
I just want to reiterate a point. I think it's really critical that we balance enrollment. As a principal at a K-8 that's becoming a K-5, we're going to be going down to 300 students. I know, Kathy, you're in the same boat. John, you're in the same boat. And so it would be nice if we could find a way to balance it so that we can have actual programming at those schools.
A couple thoughts, just things that have resonated with me. To build off of what was just said, I think it's going to be really important that for the soon to be under enrolled K-8s going to K-5s, that there's some certain guarantees in place. And I feel like I read that somewhere. But, you know, with the numbers going down, like, it needs to be guaranteed somehow that those kids are still going to get, you know, have music and art and have a media specialist and have PE. And I worry that with the numbers being so low, that will equate to low FTE and those kids losing out. So I want to make sure that that's like a guaranteed promise somewhere. And then the other thing that I just added was I like how it keeps being brought up that the schools and the families that have had to undergo a lot of kind of hardships around changes and modulars in different locations, I think it makes sense to kind of focus or prioritize those schools. It just seems like a fair thing to do. Just a few closing thoughts I had.
Yeah, I agree with that, Rosie. And also one other closing thought I have is that, like, you know, there are some schools that are much more centrally located than others. And so it's like this constant frustration that everybody feels like they are being sent to a school that's not the closest one to home, but we have to acknowledge that not everyone's going to get to attend the closest school to home, right? In order to balance enrollment. So I think we just have to really keep emphasizing that, that you don't want your kid to attend an overcrowded school where they can't get into the classes they need, right? So we need to keep the enrollments balanced throughout, even though that means that some students have to travel to a school that is, you know, and I think there's like a different perception of going to a school that is farther out from downtown versus closer into downtown, even if it's the same, you know, a similar distance. So I think we need to just keep that clear.
Well, there is just, I think, I really appreciate your point, Marissa, but there's just very much so the realities that we're have to take into account history of Portland and PPS, and the role of gentrification that has played a role in who gets to go where, and the realities that this notion of neighborhood schools is truly based on the decisions that were made in Brown versus Board of Ed. And that has some direct impacts that can be correlated to discrimination, specifically of BIPOC individuals. I think the reality is that the other thing that I think we're not discussing is that because lower enrollment will happen in some neighborhood schools in inner Southeast, that the likelihood that one of the inner Southeast schools may have to close is a reality. Because as you mentioned, Richard, the enrollment decreases in all areas for a lot of neighborhood schools. So that's gonna have to be discussed in phase 2 and what that means for communities as well. And you know, the reality that for everybody, Kellogg is close to them, but then there's a lot of schools that are close to Kellogg distance-wise. So who do we give priority to is very important in that too.
But I think also distance is relative to access and the fact that it's on Powell and it's really accessible. I think that changes like the closeness. I mean, in terms of like ability to get there. I just want to point out the fact that it is incredibly centrally located for a lot of people. I mean, and you know, on a lot of bus lines and transit close.
Well, that is true, but Harrison Park is just as accessible by transit, like right on Division.
Looks like they're going to pull us back. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the thoughts and appreciate a good dialogue.